Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to give a couple of moments for our attendees to make their way into the room. I'll give maybe a minute or two because I see the number of attendees starting to come up, and then we'll formally kick things off. Just while we're waiting, I'll let everybody know this session today is being recorded and will be available in both English language as well as Bahasa Indonesia. For those attendees who would like to change the audio channel, you can go to the bottom where there is on the menu, there's an audio button where you can choose between original audio, which is just all of the panelists speaking, English, as well as Bahasa Indonesia. And so you can click on those buttons to listen to those different channels. I think what I'll do is maybe I'll get us underway. We have more attendees coming in, but I'm sure they'll pick up as well. So first off, I guess what I'd like to say is welcome to our event called Indonesia's Energy Support Measures, Shifting Support from Fossil Fuels to Clean Energy. This is an event of the IISD Global Subsidies Initiative and coincides with a report launch that we're doing this week, where the lead author today, Lourdes Sanchez, will be giving us an overview of the results. And then following that, we'll have a panel discussion with some invited experts who I'll introduce to you in a little bit to offer their viewpoints on Indonesia's energy future and how we do this broader global transition to a low carbon economy and sort of what that means within Indonesia. Our agenda today will start with, as I mentioned, a presentation and some opening remarks from Lourdes Sanchez, and then we'll immediately go into sort of the panel discussion. There will be an opportunity for some questions and answers. I'll invite the panelists. We don't have the chat function open today, but what we do have is the questions and answers. And so if you have a question, you can click on Q&A at the bottom. You can type your question into there and you can click enter. And for the panelists, you can review questions in there. I might raise a few to ask directly on the call, or you can type answers directly into the chat. So for those attendees, I'd highly encourage you, if you have a question that comes to mind, certainly put it into the chat as soon as you would like, and we can respond to it as we go through the event. Just briefly to introduce myself, I'm Philip Gass. I'm the lead for transitions within the IISD Energy Program. So my areas of work cover topics like green economy and green growth, as well as things like circular economy, just transition and fossil fuel subsidy reform. And also geographically, I do a lot of work both in Canada as well as in Indonesia as well. Those are sort of my two global areas. I think with that, we've got about 35 participants at the moment, which I think is a good amount to sort of kick off the program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lourdes Sanchez. Lourdes Sanchez is a senior policy advisor and lead for GSI's work in Indonesia with International Institute for Sustainable Development, and is the lead author on the report that we're presenting today. So Lourdes, I'll turn it over to you, and you can feel free to share your screen as you'd like and run through your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Phil. Hope everything is fine. So yeah, I'm going to start with some initial remarks and then jump on into the presentation. And just to specify, actually, the lead author of this report is our colleague based in Indonesia, Anissa Suarsono. So unfortunately, she could not join today, so I will be presenting the results of this analysis on her behalf. But yeah, she's the main author of that. Thank you. Okay, so yes, well, I mean, to start, set up a little bit of the context. So we all know that we are going through very particular times. So you all know about the current global challenges that economies worldwide are facing, and also the extreme temperatures and changing weather patterns that are affecting people's lives and overall world economies as well. So the current situation definitely does not make it easy for governments to decide where to put the public money, and also is putting public budgets under strong pressure. So governments all over the world are defining and implementing measures to help populations, and particularly the poor and vulnerable, to face the current raise of prices of basic goods and the inflation that we are seeing these days. At the same time, governments still have their net zero plans and other climate-related targets to meet, and that should not be forgotten, nor action should be postponed, as we are already suffering the effects of climate change one way or another, and we know that this can just worsen the current situation. So the energy sector actually plays a key role in these complex environments because we all need energy at an affordable price. And at the same time, the sector needs changing, as today it is still a major source of pollution and climate change. So energy incentives and support measures from governments can help influence energy production and consumption in a way that meets a country's climate and energy targets, while supporting those that need it the most, so the poor and vulnerable. So under the current context, public money also has to be used very efficiently because it's scarce and has to meet many priorities. So therefore, having a clear view of where public money is going becomes really important. First, to understand whether countries' energy policies are aligned with their climate, social, and development targets. And second, to see whether there is potential to improve public money expenditures to ensure a just transition towards a climate-friendly and renewable energy future. So this all has to happen at global scale, but also in Indonesia. And actually, that's why we're here today. We are presenting the first ever inventory of energy support measures that has been done for Indonesia. And this identifies and quantifies support measures that are available for various energy types. So namely coal, oil, gas, renewable energy, biofuels, and electric vehicles in the country. We look at those in the years between 2016 and 2020. And overall, the report aims to provide a starting point for the government and key stakeholders, so the international community, civil society, and also non-governmental organizations, research institutions, and the general public. So we aim to provide them with this information to understand how public money is being used to support different types of energy. So as the country, Indonesia, has committed to reaching its net zero emissions by 2060, this inventory also shows like what are the support measures in Indonesia and explores whether the current fiscal policies are aligned with the net zero goal. So as Phil said, I will start presenting the key findings of the analysis. So again, on behalf of our colleague Anissa, and then, well, as Phil said, Philip said, we will go to the panel to get a broader perspective on this topic. So I'm going to start sharing my screen to present the key results. Just a second. And I hope you can all see my slides.
Yeah, we can see right now it's in edit mode, but it's just switched to presenter mode. So you're good to go, Lourdes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. So, well, just to emphasize again why we are doing this exercise. So basically it's about transparency because we believe that drives informed debate. So we know globally that the effects of support to fossil fuels and also to renewables has an effect on consumption, obviously, and in emissions. So the graph you see there is basically a study was done considering 32 countries. And you see that there's a high potential if subsidies to or support measures to fossil fuels are reformed, has a high potential to reduce CO2 emissions. And then, of course, that increases if part of that support is moving to renewable energy and energy efficiency. So that's why this is an important topic to consider from the climate perspective, but also when we look at the social side. So there are also many studies that have been conducted in different regions of the world. In this case, the example is from India, but we see that in general, the majority of support to fossil fuels actually does not benefit the poor and vulnerable. On the opposite, benefits the richest groups of population, as we can see in this case from India and the reform of electricity subsidies. So a little bit of methodology on how we approach this research. So basically, as I mentioned, so we consider 6 types of energy. So oil and gas, coal, electricity, renewables, biofuels, and also we look at electric vehicles and batteries, since it's a topic that is raising an increasing importance in Indonesia. We are looking at the fiscal years between 2016 and 2020. That means also that it is including measures that were developed under the COVID-19 National Economy Recovery Program that affected, actually there were several measures that affected the energy sector. So they're also included. Also to specify that we are talking about support measures, and the definition of that is based on the definition of subsidy from the WTO, so the World Trade Organization's agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. So that's the most broadly accepted definition for subsidy. And again, that applies also. So the different categories that are under this definition are applied to the analysis done in this report. So how to estimate? The methods are based on the methodology for the SDG indicator 12.3.1, which is of fossil fuel subsidies. So just for those that do not know, there is an SDG indicator, a Sustainable Development Goal indicator that measures or estimates subsidies to fossil fuels. So this follows exactly the same methodology. And to conclude, so a total of 78 measures, sorry, were identified, but out of those, we could only estimate or quantify around a third, so 29 measures. So that means that the numbers we're going to be showing today and that you can see in the report, actually, is very likely to be an underestimate because many measures require data that we couldn't approach, we couldn't reach, or we couldn't have, and also some more complex ways of estimating those. So this is about the methodology. I'm going to pass directly with the results. And the first finding, I mean, one of the key findings is like energy support measures disproportionately benefit fossil fuels. So you can see here a summary of the quantified measures. So again, many of them, they could not be quantified, but of those that we could quantify, we see that actually fossil fuels, we consider oil, gas, coal, and electricity, because we know in Indonesia, most of the electricity is generated using fossil fuels, so coal, oil, gas, and other types of fossil fuels. So we see that they take the big majority of the support measures that we identified. So also we see that actually the total raised by 38%, so almost 40%. In the period observed, so from 200 trillion Indonesian rupiah in fiscal year 2016 up to 279 trillion in fiscal year 2020. This number on top is expected to increase as we have seen globally that there's a strong correlation between support to fossil fuels in general or energy and the international oil prices. And we know that today's oil prices are reaching, like historical records. So it's very likely that these figures are higher in 2021 and especially 2022. But for now, what we see also is like 94% of the total support estimated was allocated to support coal, oil, gas, and fossil fuel-based electricity, and only 1% allocated to renewables. If we dig a little bit more into the numbers, we see actually that the support to fossil fuels increased over the period observed, whereas the support to renewables decreased. This is an important finding as well, because we know Indonesia has a target to reach 23% of new and renewable energy by 2025. And right now, indications show that, there are indications that tell that Indonesia still has to do some effort to reach that target. So as we see that the public support is actually more addressed to fossil fuels and to renewables, there's here we can say that we can identify that there's some room for developing more adapted measures to support renewable energy as well. So what we see is that, the support to fossil fuels increased by 30% between the years observed, whereas the support to renewables, it dropped from 3 trillion in fiscal year 2016 to 2 trillion Indonesian rupiah in fiscal year 2020. A big reason behind that, it was actually the fact that the feed-in tariffs were stopped within the period. And as we say, so at the same time, there are estimates from the government that actually their country needs to invest at least 500 Indonesian rupiah trillion to reach the clean energy targets that it has set up. So, for example, switching support from fossil fuels to renewables can help meet this target. The key finding number 3 is that most of the quantified support goes to energy consumers. So we can see that graph that 72% of the support quantified, it went to consumers, whereas around 30%, so 28% went to producers. However, it is true as well that most of the measures that affected the producers, they could not be quantified. And actually, if we look in this graph at the number of measures that we identify, but we did not estimate because there were no data available, we see that the big chunk of measures actually goes to the production of energy. So we have over 40 measures that could not be identified and almost 20 measures that were quantified, but still the value was lower than the ones that we identified for consumption. So again, it is very likely that this graph that you can see in the slide, so the pie chart, it's actually underestimated, and with higher increases will be expected in production subsidies or support. Sorry. And the last finding that we are sharing today is that actually the Indonesian state-owned enterprises receive almost half of the total quantified support. So we have there the blue areas, the support that has been conferred to Pertamina and to PLN. On top, we have also all the support that was offered to PLN and Pertamina and other SOEs linked to fossil fuel subsidies, to fossil fuels, sorry, as part of the COVID-19 recovery package. And basically a big part of those are actually to compensate lower prices for consumers versus the international prices that Pertamina and PLN have to buy, basically. And this is it in terms of findings. Today we are launching this report, so you can find it already online. This is the cover of the report, and there you have the link. And also I want to highlight that actually, we have some graphs like the ones you see here, where you can basically play with data. You will see that in the page of the report, and I don't know if you can still see my screen building up with the graphs.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So basically, some of the, I will go to one of these, for example, so you can then play with data, download them. And for example, you can select a specific type of energy, and then you will find the particular type of the specific values. And also you have other measures, again, linked to the SDG methodology for the indicator 12.0.1, where you can, for example, select different types of subsidies, for example, those that benefit consumers, producers, and also if it's tax exemptions, if it's budget transfers, etc. Also, you can select the years if you want a more specific view. And this is it from my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lourdes. I think we'll probably end up with some questions coming through for you, but I think in the interest of time, what I'd encourage our panelists to do is please put those questions into the question and answer box. And during question and answer, Lourdes can address some of them, and she can also type some answers in the meantime. And also, thank you very much for reminding me about the important contributions of Anissa Suarsono to this. She's under the weather today, unable to join us, but was a really critical researcher to this work that's being done. I think with that, we'll move into the next part of our discussion, which is the panel discussion, where our speakers will have the opportunity to provide their thoughts on the issue of energy issues in Indonesia and some of the things that are underway, and also sort of the role of clean energy and in an environmentally friendly energy in the next stage of in the next several years. Our first speaker is Andy Noviento, who's with us today, who's joined us. He's the Assistant Deputy for Oil and Gas, Mining and Petrochemicals at the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs for the Republic of Indonesia. Thank you very much, Andy, for joining us today, and interested in your thoughts. Otherwise, I think maybe he's just dropped off, or are you still there, Andy? Are you with us? Oh,
yes,
I see you now.
Phillips.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, I'm still in the car.
Okay. No problem.
Thank you, Phillips and Lourdes. Let me speak in Bahasa, if it is okay.
Yes, please. Please go ahead, and people can transition through the interpreter channel if needed, but please go ahead.
Oke. Selamat siang dan salam sehat untuk kita semua. Pertama-tama kami mengucapkan apresiasi yang setinggi-tingginya kepada IISD yang telah membuat publikasi terkait dengan sektor energi di Indonesia. Kita ketahui bersama sektor energi adalah salah satu sektor utama bagi pembangunan ekonomi nasional, dan ekonomi nasional akan tumbuh secara baik dan berkelanjutan jika mendapatkan pasokan energi dalam jumlah yang cukup dan berkesinambungan, baik secara kuantitas maupun kualitas, secara efisien dan kompetitif, sehingga meningkatkan daya saing Indonesia khususnya di kancah regional maupun global. Ketahanan dan kemandirian energi nasional adalah kondisi ideal yang tentunya menjadi harapan semua pemangku kepentingan di Indonesia, dan pada kenyataannya beberapa komoditas energi primer tidak dapat dipenuhi oleh produksi dari dalam negeri sehingga diperlukan impor. Di sisi lain, untuk mengatasi kesenjangan pemenuhan kebutuhan energi juga melalui peningkatan kapasitas produksi di dalam negeri. Indonesia berkomitmen kuat untuk memaksimalkan penggunaan energi yang ramah lingkungan. Dan opsi ini bukan merupakan sebuah pilihan, tetapi sebuah keharusan. Untuk itu, peningkatan kontribusi melalui penggunaan teknologi hijau dan energi bersih, terutama untuk sektor transportasi, industri, serta ketenagalistrikan, termasuk dalam rangka untuk mengurangi emisi karbon. Dalam hal ini, khusus untuk ketenagalistrikan, maka tentunya komitmen ini tercermin dalam RUPTL, Rencana Usaha Penyediaan Tenaga Listrik yang dibuat setiap tahunnya. Kebijakan transisi energi untuk mulai meninggalkan penggunaan energi fosil juga telah banyak dilakukan oleh banyak negara melalui pemanfaatan energi terbarukan, dan untuk itu diperlukan proses matang dalam menghadapi proses transisi tersebut. Pelaksanaan transisi energi adalah komitmen penuh pada penggunaan energi terbarukan sehingga dapat mendukung kebutuhan energi di dalam negeri serta mendorong perekonomian nasional. Sebagai presidensi G20 saat ini, Indonesia telah menjadikan transisi energi sebagai satu dari 3 topik utama dalam kerangka presidensi G20 Indonesia, selain sistem kesehatan global dan transformasi ekonomi digital. Hal ini tercermin dengan mengamankan akses ke teknologi dan pendanaan untuk mempercepat transisi energi yang telah dilakukan secara terencana. Dengan kondisi geopolitik yang menyebabkan kerentanan disrupsi pasokan energi fosil, maka Indonesia perlu untuk terus melakukan upaya diversifikasi energi, antara lain melalui pengembangan panas bumi, bioenergi seperti biomass, biogas, or biofuel, coal to DMA, penggunaan ekosistem baterai, penggunaan energi bersih di sektor pembangkit, namun juga diversifikasi ke energi bersih, termasuk untuk tenaga surya, angin, dan air yang harus didukung oleh pembangunan teknologi penyimpanan energi yang baik. Adanya fluktuasi pasokan energi global tersebut berdampak pula terhadap kenaikan harga energi yang sangat tinggi, dan hal ini juga terjadi di Indonesia. Namun demikian, kondisi ini telah dimitigasi agar pasokannya tetap terjaga dan harga energi dapat tetap terjangkau, terutama atau khususnya pada masyarakat menengah ke bawah. Pada tahun 2022 diperkirakan pertumbuhan ekonomi berekspor sebagai dampak pelaksanaan reformasi struktural. Namun dalam hal ini kita tetap harus waspada mengingat ketidakpastian global dan domestik yang juga masih berisiko terhadap pertumbuhan ekonomi. Dengan perbaikan perekonomian ini, maka kebijakan transisi energi serta net zero emission dapat terjaga dengan baik pula. Oleh karenanya, kolaborasi yang kuat dari para pemangku kepentingan, baik pemerintah, badan usaha, lembaga penelitian, serta masyarakat akan tetap dibutuhkan agar pelaksanaan berbagai kebijakan di sektor energi ini dapat berjalan secara lancar. Demikian, terima kasih. Thank you, Philips.
Thank you very much for the remarks and for the and especially for the kind words for our report, and you make some good comments about the need for cautious and diversified approaches having come out of 2 years of pandemic related issues, as well as recent global energy supply chain restrictions. It certainly place caution at the head of issues, and also that we need to consider diversification, not just in terms of the environmental arguments, but also energy security arguments, as well as economic arguments as well. So some well-made comments there. Again, just a reminder, if anybody has questions, to please go ahead and put them into the chat, and we can collect those for the question and answer portion of the program. Our next speaker is Thomas Henriksen. He's the head of energy cooperation between Denmark and Indonesia at the Danish Embassy in Jakarta. Thomas previously worked in the Danish capital Copenhagen as the chief advisor at Dansk Energy, the Danish energy agency, and special advisor to the Ministry of Climate and Energy, among others. He holds a master's degree in technological and socioeconomic planning from a university of Denmark. And Thomas, you've been in Indonesia for a while now, and having your own background and your experience with the Danish Energy Association, as well as your experiences on the ground in Indonesia. I'm interested in your perspectives on some of the issues that have come up today.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. And thank you, Pa Andy, for your interesting point of view. It's true, I've been here for 3 years in Indonesia, meaning I'm not an expert in Indonesian conditions in that way. I've done some observations during my time here, of course, and I'm not either in a position where I could tell Indonesia what to do on subsidy reforms or subsidy policy. But I think it's very interesting discussion we are having here. I have seen this report before. That's a thing you have done previously, and I always like to see this update, even though I know it's a hard task to actually gather the data, and it's not possible to gather all data to have an overview of the total energy subsidies in Indonesia. When I just had a look into the report, I note that for those of the subsidies where there is data, the subsidies are increasing. I could see within the past 5 years, maybe, the subsidies for coal, for instance, has been tripled. That's a lot. Of course, when you do this kind of scientific work, there is some delay in data. So the last year with data is 2020. But I can also see when looking into this report that due to the recent conditions at the energy markets, which that has to do with different conflicts, not least the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of the world market prices on energy has increased significantly in 2022. Meaning also that some of these subsidies that you mentioned in this report must have increased in amount during the past 6 months, because some of the prices on the fuel for vehicles, the world market prices has increased, while the sales prices in Indonesia has been held stable. So some of the subsidies, for instance, for Pertamina and so on, must have increased. One thing I cannot really figure out, but I think it is in that way that you are quantifying mostly the subsidies that is direct subsidies, while I think it's a little difficult to maybe sometimes get an amount on the indirect subsidies, for instance, the domestic market obligation on the coal, where it's sold to a price which is $70 per ton, meaning way below world market prices. And where do I want to go by saying this? See, yeah, this is a chosen policy you can do, and I fully understand a lot of the intentions behind having high subsidies, for instance, for buying LPG and petrol and cheap electricity for poor households. But with the recent developments and the huge increase at the world market prices, this must also be a heavy burden for the state budget. And the idea about that could maybe be to consider, is there any way to achieve the targets that Indonesia wants to do with its energy subsidy policies in a smarter way? That could be more direct social subsidies, perhaps. So you target the poor households so they can still get their affordable energy. Understand is a very important thing to make sure is available. I also like some of the ideas Pa Andy is presenting, because there are also other ways to save subsidies on the state budget and also increase the benefit on the trade budget, so it's not a deficit. And that is to do with also the green energy transition in that way, that renewable energy and not least energy efficiency measures can also ease the burden on the state budget. So when I look at this, in my perspective, I think there are maybe some possibilities that Indonesia could actually get the state budget in a better condition and still achieving some of the same targets that is a national policy. And I think the national economy of Indonesia could also benefit from looking into some of these energy subsidies. Again, I'm not an expert on exactly what should be done, but I really believe that giving these perspectives on what are actually these amounts and could they be activated in a smarter way where the whole of Indonesia could benefit and the population could benefit from having cheap energy still, but also greener energy in the future. I think these are some of the discussions that would be very interesting to dig into from my point of view. So I'm really much looking forward to continue this discussion today and also after this day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And just to note as well for the audience, Denmark is also a member of the international group called the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform as well. And so we appreciate Denmark's efforts to try to help drive fossil fuel subsidy reform globally, as well as in individual countries. And so appreciate your comments today, Thomas, on this topic. I think we'll move to our next speaker, which is Dr. Filda Citra Yuskigantoro. And she's the chairperson of the Purnomo Yuskigantoro Center, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to independent, in-depth research leading to providing policy solutions and recommendations around energy security and sustainability at the local, national, and global level, and was founded in 2016. Besides chairing the PYC, Ibu Filda is a lecturer in economics at the Prasetya Mulia University in South Jakarta and a board member at the Climate Works Center based in Melbourne, Australia. So with that, Ibu Filda, I'm interested in your perspectives. I know you've got some slides you're interested to share with us today, and very much looking forward to your views on this issue of energy transition in Indonesia.
Thank you, Philip. First of all, I would like to congratulate to ISD for the inauguration of the report publication to support measures for the energy sector in Indonesia. We have read the report and we think that it is a very comprehensive report and very useful for any stakeholders in energy sector in Indonesia. So congratulate to that. For the committee, could you share my slide presentation? Thank you.
Yes, you should be able to go ahead.
Philip, please tell me if my time is up.
Yeah, I think we're good to start, and please just go ahead.
Okay, so given that our organization research is based on the energy security, we would like to highlight on the 4 A's. The next slide, please. So the 4 A's is the base of the energy security, waiting that we need to pay attention to the country's economic, social, and political conditions within a certain period and what targets to achieve. So it is possible that the 4A weighting will change as the government priorities is changing too. So if we look into the current situation in Indonesia, that affordability is the most important aspect because people's purchasing power is still low and there is no direct subsidy policy. So the energy prices is the important aspect of maintaining this socio-political stability. In the recent news, actually, in the beginning of this year, that the Indonesian government is in a process of framing a direct electricity subsidy scheme to enable the target recipients to receive the subsidy. So that is really good news for us in the beginning of the year. However, in the future, energy prices subsidy must begin to be replaced by direct subsidies. Direct subsidies will give greater benefits to Indonesian people in health, education, and other welfare matters. The next slide, please. So this is the national energy mix. The Indonesian domestic energy backbone strongly relies on fossil energy still. However, the percentage of oil in energy mix has decreased over time, but unfortunately, coal's percentage increases. But again, fossil energy is widely known for its effectiveness and efficiency. However, the security of fossil energy has strongly impacted Indonesia's economic growth. However, it impacts towards climate is also concerning. So we see that diversifying energy profile is necessary to reduce the dependency on one commodity, also to contribute to mitigate to the climate change. So energy transition becomes critical to be accelerated. The next slide. So given the questions from the committee, there are 3 questions to Purnomo Yustiantoro Center. The first question is, what do you think about Indonesia's renewable energy potential? And what do you think the government can do to support its deployment? So answering the first question from the committee about what do you think about Indonesia's renewable energy potential, Indonesia has abundant new and renewable energy potential, ranging from solar, hydro, bioenergy, wind, geothermal, and marine energy. A study from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources reveals that the a total potential utilization of this new and renewable energy, as we can see here in the table, is a total with 648,300 megawatts, which by 2030, 50% of new renewable energy comes from hydropower, solar, and geothermal. So this means that the energy transition will actually have a positive impact on Indonesia's gross domestic product, especially support from the private sector and also the public sector in its financing. But however, Indonesia, the development of the new renewable energy, there are several challenges that must be faced. For example, ranging from the network limitations, the need of a large base load or storage power plants, market uncertainty, transportation, infrastructure, and also, for example, like decreasing in energy consumption due to the sudden pandemic or from the geopolitics from the war from Ukraine and also Russia. To the next slide. So also regarding to the questions about what do you think the government do in Indonesia to support its deployment, we look at it in 3 perspectives, which is policy, technology, and economy. From the policy perspective, we see that finalizing the renewable energy law is necessary, and there are news that it will be finalized before the G20 in November. So I think we need to push that bill because the bill will design as a concrete move Indonesian regulatory framework in supporting clean and renewable energy. So this will also encourage the new and renewable energy investment in Indonesia as well. The other thing in the policy perspective is the accelerating the coal phase down and implementing the coal gasification and liquefaction. The phase down approach is preferable because coal is still affordable actually as an energy source for Indonesia and also for other developing countries. So this should be introduced along with the variable of renewable energy and also diversification. In the transportation sector, it is necessary to have a solid policy on accelerating the shift from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, just like Andy has already mentioned. Also in the household sector, there should be a policy that needed to encourage cooking fuel transition to LPG to electricity by providing incentives for households. And also the last one is state-owned enterprise intervention. And also the other second perspective that we see is the technology. We acknowledge the natural gas as a bridging fuel. Maybe for most of us here already know that there are gas reserve potential, a big one at the Natuna area. So if we can utilize this, it will accommodate the energy demands in Indonesia, including also around Southeast Asia countries. And for example, for technology as well, the government should substitute the technology for CCUS, CCS could be employed as a mitigation tool when cheaper renewables and clean fuels are unavailable. In the industry sector, CCS or CCUS will be more beneficial for the most intensive energy utilization industry, which is for steel, cement, or chemical industry. So, using this CCS and CCUS is very beneficial for Indonesia. Also seeing as Indonesia as an archipelagic country, technology development on a small scale, it should be prioritized according to the needs of Indonesia. For example, we had research about mini LNG, which can be potential for energy source for the local areas, but it's still not feasible, economically feasible yet. So, and also, for example, in technology perspective, there is also potential to acquire foreign technology on a large scale while continuing to develop domestic technology. In the economic perspective, we have quite a little bit of research about crowdfunding. There are significant potential of crowdfunding as a community financing based source. So in the slide here, from our research as well, the total potential investment could reach up to 192 trillion rupiah per annum, or up to 46 trillion rupiah per annum for donation. And for example, like incentives for national financial institutions to support the development of renewable energy, including small scale projects, which are usually not economically attractive, is really beneficial for Indonesia. And other part, for example, gradually transform price subsidy to direct subsidy. This will reduce the subsidies budget and allow the government to allocate the budget to subsidize the renewable energy projects. So this will also benefit the economy of its people. For example, like providing incentive to projects on supporting renewable energy. And as we already know that there will be carbon tax implementation, the revenue from the carbon tax implementation should benefit the economy of its people, or maybe financing the renewable energy project and so on that could benefit the not benefit but accelerate the renewable energy in Indonesia. And then the next slide. So the second question from the creator is, what should Indonesia take into consideration when transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy, especially in the context of just transition? As we can see here that, for example, investment, increasing the investment is critical to ease the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Financial institutions also should work hand in hand with the government to accelerate the renewable energy investment. So, for example, like in the report has already mentioned as well that maybe there has been an issue by the Financial Service Authority about the basis to provide incentives for green economic activities to avoid greenwashing. There are the classification for the sustainable economic activities that should be used as this basis for the incentives, which we can see it will it will give a huge benefit for the green economy in Indonesia. And also, as we are aware that the renewable energy investment is likely to create jobs. Based from the Ministry of National Development Planning in Indonesia mentioned that the jobs from the renewable energy will create 4.4 million new jobs related to green jobs and will reach a GDP of 600 trillion rupiah by 2030. So the government can grab this opportunity to create a just transition without a massive unemployment. Maybe Professor Paul already know as well, in Australia, for instance, the country provide lessons on how to manage such a transition from building a social impact, diversify the regional economy, such as develop links with related industries, fund labor-intensive projects, and also provide skill development for coal regions. So a lesson learned from Australia that Indonesia can receive, that to follow this just transition to a smoother phase of to energy, more to a clean energy phase. And for others, like here, the policy need education, training, and also we must also not forget the energy transition should also include gender equality aspects in all policies. This should start by collecting better data, remapping all the policies, and identifying which policies ignore the gender equality principles. The next slide. So the last question from the committee is about the sizable increase in fossil fuel subsidies, as reported in the media. So in here, we have a little bit of research, the results of our research. We know that the crude oil price has been skyrocketing as a result of the Russia's invasion, with the value marking the highest oil price since 2016. So as the crude price raised, Indonesia needed to readjust its oil and gas downstream by adjusting the fuel price of Pertamax Plus, Pertamax, and Pertamina Dex. So in consequence, more people move from Pertamax to Pertalite. Pertalite is has a cheaper value and also subsidized by the government. So the Pertalite presents as the alternative for Pertamax, which will increase the subsidy allocation. So that is a great impact to our country because of the Russia and Ukraine war. But at the same time, the rising crude price has improved the Indonesia's revenue from oil and gas sector for better profit. As seen in the table below, the rising crude price has increased the tax and non-tax state revenues. Thus, the increase in subsidy could be compensated by an increase in revenues of approximately around 10% of the revenues here. But in reality, the rising crude price also negatively affects other development sectors. And so the revenue will be allocated to repress it, meaning that the revenue is utilized to absorb the market shock rather than to fund other development sectors. The next slide. So how the fossil fuel subsidies impact the renewable energy and energy transition agenda? So this is the last question. So it also, the subsidies will also trigger natural gas, coal, and palm oil price to increase, as we can see here in the graphic. This condition happened as those commodities present as the alternative energy source of crude oil. So most electricity in Indonesia is generated from oil and natural gas. So the generation costs will also increase as well. So Indonesia had to allocate more budget to absorb the shock and stabilize the economy. The intervention had to be done immediately as it was necessary to protect the people's purchase power during the economic rebound post-pandemic. However, this hurt the state budget as more money needs to be spent. So this means that this condition indicates that Indonesia is vulnerable to energy price shock and transition to clean energy, which becomes critical. How to mitigate this vulnerability? Indonesia needs to optimize its renewable energy sources, and support from other stakeholders are important. Critically, Indonesia needs to improve many parts to attract more investors. The investment in renewable energy has been stagnant in the last 7 years. And also, Indonesia needs to commit to develop the renewable energy through legal certainty and ease of doing business players, which are the key to the success. So that is the brief information that I would like to give today. Also, there are several comments for the draft report, and I think me and my team will give a little bit of comment about the draft report according to the sector, the oil and gas and electricity and so on, but because of the time constraint, so we will give it after the webinar. So I will give back to you, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments very much. And that last slide you had was quite telling with all these energy price increases. We saw over the course of the pandemic, these shocks that you talk about, first with prices going very, very low and then accelerating to very, very high levels just within the span of a couple of years as outside dynamics had a play in the market. So it sort of indicates that need to diversify and adjust and encourage more local and renewable clean energy development, certainly. I think we'll move on to our final speaker for today is Professor Paul Burke, who is professor and head of the Arndt Gordon Department of Economics at the Crawford School of Public Policy at Australian National University in Canberra. He leads the Energy Economics and Policy Research Cluster of the ANU Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions, and is a project coordinator on the Zero Carbon Energy for the Asia Pacific Grand Challenge projects at ANU and among others. His research interests include energy economics, environmental economics, transport economics, development economics, a lot of economics, and Asia Pacific economies in particular. I've known Paul for several years. He's done a lot of great research in Australia and Indonesia, and I'm very interested, Paul, for your comments today. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and it's great to see everyone. Thank you very much for having me along to talk today. I'd also like to congratulate the Global Subsidies Initiative and IISD for the release of the report. The Global Subsidies Initiative has been doing great work year in, year out, and really is shining a lot of light and good researchability as well on this key topic of energy subsidies. Economists would very broadly agree that we need to be getting prices right. If there are negative externalities from an activity, well, we should not be subsidizing that activity. Ideally, it would be subject to a tax, a Pigovian tax. And good things like renewables and clean energy, well, there's a strong case for government support via research and development subsidies and in other ways as well. So really, it's good to see this report shining the light on the still troubling situation of quite a few fossil fuel subsidies still in place in Indonesia, and certainly relative to the subsidies for renewables. There is some room for optimism though, and there are some good news stories. In particular, this year, Indonesia is intending to introduce a carbon tax, a small carbon tax, and starting with thermal coal. It's a great step in the right direction as Indonesia moves along the road of getting prices right and introducing carbon pricing more broadly, eventually outside of only just the focus on thermal coal. It's a very interesting, challenging, and certainly exciting time in the energy sector at the moment. Around the world, we are entering a new age in terms of energy, and that is the age of solar and wind. If we look at the global statistics and we add the solar and wind contributions together, globally, solar plus wind has now passed 10% of electricity generation. In some countries like Australia, it's more than 20% already, pretty sunny and windy and lots of land down here as well. Indonesia has a huge potential in solar power. And it's true that there are potentials in other areas as well, such as geothermal, which is important. And wind, well, Indonesia is not particularly windy, but there are some opportunities there as well. If we had to simplify, the very big opportunity is solar. And really, when we're looking at energy policy in Indonesia, well, there are huge opportunities there in solar PV. And here I'm talking about solar on rooftops, floating solar, including on the sea, because the seas tend to be quite calm relative to some other locations, quite calm in Indonesia, in agricultural contexts, and also in the on land-based context as well. Although we do not want to be clearing forest for solar, we want the solar to be put in other locations. Indonesia is falling behind. So if we look at Indonesia, the solar plus wind share of electricity generation, it's still well below 1%. We have seen how countries can move very quickly when the price and other signals are right. A good example is Vietnam. Vietnam came from 0% solar and wind contribution a few years ago to now about 10% of electricity in Vietnam is from solar and wind. How did they do it? Well, it's a sign that prices can work. So let's just think about the solar part of the story in Vietnam. They had a premium feed-in tariff in place for a few years. The market went very quickly, installed lots of solar PV, and that share in the electricity mix has jumped up to 10%. The potential is huge. And as mentioned in the earlier presentation by Filda, actually Indonesia's potential in solar is much, much bigger than will ever be needed. The amount of sunshine landing on the water and the land as well is much larger than will need to be harvested. This is not a transition that will happen overnight. It's all about step by step, but we also want to be accelerating it as much as possible. So when we're thinking, and I'll just make a couple more brief comments and then hand back. When we're thinking about the solar opportunity in Indonesia, first of all, it's huge. Second of all, some things are happening. Indonesia recently had a reverse auction for provision of solar energy from a floating solar installation. They had the reverse auction and the price coming in the reverse auction was nicely competitively low, which is good. And that's what we've seen in other countries such as India. What could Indonesia be doing here? And I just thought I'd throw in a few ideas and happy to have more discussion as well in the panel setting. One idea is for Indonesia to introduce a solar target, and a very ambitious one as well. That has been one of the lessons from Australia. We introduced the 20% by 2020 renewable energy target, and we introduced a mechanism, a renewable portfolio standard mechanism, or APIO, that helped to drag that solar and wind into the grid very quickly. That type of approach of a solar target would be really a good way to go. Not just solar, it could be broader to renewables, but the big potential there is in solar. It would also be possible to go for a solar mission. And the mission, what do economists mean when we say mission? It means the government really putting a lot of policy levers towards one goal. And those policy levers include getting taxes and subsidies right, removing or reducing at least fossil fuel subsidies, getting the prices right, having policy mechanisms such as green certificate schemes that help to encourage that solar and other renewables onto the grid as well. India is an interesting country there, and lots of lessons from India. They have really prioritized solar and wind, some very ambitious targets, use of reverse auctions, and bringing other policies into play to really try to hurry up in this energy transition. Great news from Indonesia is the net zero by 2060 ambition. There's a lot of work to do to achieve that. If we can focus a lot on the electricity sector, make sure that it's as clean as possible, and then electrify other energy use, electrify transport, electrify industry, electrify cooking, and so on. We can make a huge deal of progress towards that net zero goal. So yeah, I'll hand it back over there, Phil, but very exciting time in the energy sector and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate, and thank you to you and to all the panelists for your opening comments, some interesting perspectives to go into. So we're open now for the question and answer part of the session. Again, I encourage people to put questions into the Q&A box, and we can address those as part of the group. I've got a few of my own as well, if time allows, that I might ask. But I think we'll go. I do have a couple of questions in the question box. And Lourdes, the first one I think I'll direct to you. For some people who may have joined a bit late, I was wondering if you could sort of restate in just a couple of minutes some of the key messages from the IISD report that was released today. and just sort of to catch those up who might have joined a little bit after your presentation.
Sure, so I will speak through them, but happy also to share supporting data if someone is interested. So the first one, well, again, just to summarize, just in case, so we'll look at different types of energy here, any kind of support, government support that is conferred to oil, gas, coal. So we'll look at biofuels, electric vehicles, electricity, and renewable energy. So the first message actually is that the energy support measures disproportionately benefit fossil fuels. 94% of the total support identified, they go to coal, oil, gas, and also fossil fuel-based electricity. And on the other hand, renewables are getting only 1% of the total support that we looked at. So the remaining 5% actually is going to biofuels, so another area quite support as well. The second key message or key finding that we got is like the support to fossil fuels has been increasing over the period considering the analysis, that is fiscal year 2016 up to fiscal year 2020, while support to renewable energy has decreased in the same period. So the fossil fuels saw an increase, the support to fossil fuels saw an increase of around 30%. And the same proportion also of the decrease observed in support to renewables, mostly because of the stopping the feed-in tariffs. The third key message is that actually most of the quantified support is going to energy consumers. But if we look at the number of measures that we looked at, even if we could not identify them, actually most of them, they are supporting producers. And the last one is actually that, Indonesian state-owned enterprises, so mostly Pertamina and PLN, are getting almost half of the total support that we identified, and in a big part is basically support directly to these companies in order to artificially keep consumer prices low. So those are the main things that we observe in this report.
Thank you, Lourdes. We've got a question. I see it's been responded to in the chat, but maybe I'll just bring it up for those who may not have seen the exchange. So I'll read it out. It says, "Good afternoon, Ibafilda. Is the use of used cooking oil to be converted into biofuels, biodiesel, potential enough to support Indonesia's clean energy or renewable energy? Please let me know your thoughts." And I know you've typed an answer to this in the chat, but maybe just to share for those who may not have seen your answer.
Okay, thank you, Philip. The used cooking oil has a very good potential in Indonesia, actually, as I have already written here. The numbers is that the consumption of cooking oil in Indonesia has reached 16.2 million kiloliter. But from the 16.2 million kiloliter, only 40% until 60% can be used as this used cooking oil. And from percentage, Indonesia has just 18.5% of UCO as UCO, and a small amount used for biodiesel, and the rest is to use the cooking oil being used again as cooking and also export. So if Indonesia can grab the potential of consume and then use it as the used cooking oil full potential, I believe that it can support the Indonesia's clean energy. However, because this is quite not quite new, but the value chain is quite large, because you need to have the storage mechanism first, and also support from the local government, and also for the processing facilities. So it's kind of like everyone need to support on the used cooking oil to support the clean energy in Indonesia, actually. But this is quite an opportunity for to develop the used cooking oil, to convert it to biodiesel for the clean energy in Indonesia. I hope that can answer Edward's question.
Thank you very much. I've got another question here, and Andy, I think I'll go to you first on this one. It's a question in the chat, if you're interested. It says, what measures is the government considering to ensure that energy transition is equitable and that no one's left behind? I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Hello?
Phillips, can I
Yes.
add about UCO first?
Sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you.
Thank you. Yes. Is it? Sorry.
Yeah, just any thoughts about how to ensure
Can I
the
hear
energy? Yes, I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, first, I think I would like to add some more about UCO first. Yeah, let me speak in Bahasa.
Yeah,
Is
please
that
go ahead.
okay?
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just the question is how to ensure the transition is fair and that people aren't left behind.
Alright. Memang untuk transisi energi sudah dalam tahap perencanaan dan saat ini sedang dibuat semacam kebijakan bagaimana transisi energi ini berjalan dengan baik. Salah satu hal yang menjadi topik pembahasan utama adalah keterjangkauan, terutama kepada masyarakat menengah ke bawah. Dan hal ini memang tidak mudah agar affordability dari masing-masing level masyarakat ini bisa berjalan sesuai dengan kebijakan. Yang kedua adalah memang satu yang dijalankan adalah melalui yang kita acu pada green energy, baik itu renewable energy utamanya maupun proses terhadap penggunaan fossil energy yang lebih bersih, misalkan melalui gasifikasi ataupun pencairan dalam hal ini untuk batu bara. Tentunya ini yang secara bertahap dapat dilakukan. Mungkin demikian Pak Philips. Yang kedua adalah mengenai UCO. Kita sedang menyiapkan green refinery yang akan bersumber salah satunya adalah UCO. Namun permasalahannya adalah ketersediaan UCO ini menjaga keberlanjutan agar green refinery yang akan dibangun ini bisa tetap terjaga. Terima kasih Pak Philips. Thank you Philips.
Yeah, thank you very much for that perspective, and of course, security of supply is critical. I think for some of these fuels, and also for your comments about affordability. I think that's a key energy access issue that certainly you highlight. Bufilda, back to you. I think on the first half of what the question was, could you elaborate on the meaning of just in the context of energy transition in Indonesia? And I think it was you who mentioned just transition in your presentation. So maybe your thoughts on that, and also on this question of being equitable and ensuring people aren't left behind.
Thank you, Philip. If we see the just transition, we had a small analysis as well. We had also several talks with some experts about just transition and also energy transition. So what's the difference? I asked my staff, and just transition is more universal. So not only we see as in the energy sector only, but just transition is like looking towards, for example, what I mentioned about the gender equality. How can we boost the participation of women in local areas to support new and renewable energy or local energy in their areas? And also, for example, it's all about law as well, the energy law, the energy policy, and everything together in one dimension that all of us need to consider to make the renewable energy target achieved in Indonesia. So I think that we see that as a really universal thing, a more, I don't know, general way that we see it as an energy transition, but more in a general way.
Thanks very much. And maybe I'll just throw it out if either Paul or Thomas or Lourdes want to comment on this issue of equity and just transition, if any of you are interested to make a comment on this topic.
Just to add that Indonesia has made amazing progress in terms of electrification over recent years and really pushing towards a very high electrification rate. And new technologies can help really a lot with electricity access in remote areas. As they keep improving, solar and then batteries as well, solar battery systems are really very useful, and mini grid systems as well in terms of improving access. Just one additional point is that Indonesia also has the ability for cash transfers via their cash transfer system targeted at the most needy. And that is really an important thing to have, especially when we're thinking of a time of energy price shocks at the moment due to the invasion of Ukraine. Really, it's a great potential to be able to provide cash transfers at such times instead of changing energy prices or trying to hold them still artificially. So really, ideally, energy prices would be able to have more flexibility in Indonesia and to move more. But to make sure no one's left behind, the cash transfer system could be used more over time. So when energy prices are high, like at the moment, internationally, cash transfers could be part of the strategy.
Yeah, and probably I will just add, basically building up on these excellent comments. But as Madam Filda said, just transition is a very broad topic. So another area that should be considered also is, for example, coal phase out and, well, coal power generation phase out. So as we know, the RUPTL, the latest one, is considering reduction of coal power capacity. So communities and all the whole economic system that is linked to that also has to be considered under the lens of the just transition. So all these workers of the coal power plants, the plants need to be developed in order to, well, ensure the future jobs, or like ensure their that their basic needs are still covered, and different plans that have been developed in other parts of the world can be, I mean, Indonesia can look at them to learn from them, and definitely not disregard this important aspect, especially as the transition away from fossil fuel is going to happen. So that really affects in a very broad way, and there are different mechanisms there that Indonesian government can learn from.
Thank you. Thomas, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, not to echo it exactly the same way, I fully agree with Paul that Indonesia has done amazing on the electrification, and that's really something in just transition. I think also when we see in the larger grids, people that have already had electricity all the time, we are with the current technology stage standing in a situation where Indonesia can actually take advantage of the cheaper renewable energy and implement it also in the larger grids. And that can be done in a way where you reduce production costs and making more targeted subsidies to keep the prices low for the poorest consumers will be most likely be an advantage for both like electricity utility like PLN and the state budget and so on. So the situation with very high fossil prices at the world market and the downward trend on renewable energy is an opportunity. And all the scenarios we have made in our bilateral cooperation even also emphasize that if you combine building renewable energy with ambitious energy efficiency, that could be in transportation sector, electrification, it can also be AC units at home, the savings might be even bigger when you're looking at it in the broad national perspective. So I think there is an opportunity for Indonesia to have a better national economy, better trade balance, more possibilities of export, and also a better state budget while going green through some subsidy reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's good. I appreciate all the comments on this, and I know the topic of just transition is very top of mind in international forums as well as within individual countries and regions at the moment. So I'm glad we were able to get into that. Just a reminder as well, there's still a little bit of time, maybe about 5 to 10 minutes left if people want to put questions into the question and answer box, and we can address those live. But seeing that we don't have any at the moment, I might go to one of mine. We feel that back to you, you had on your solutions this idea of moving from price subsidies to direct subsidies. And I thought that was sort of interesting. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how this might work, or some specific examples of how we do that transition from having price subsidies to direct subsidies, and how that can assist with energy transition.
Yes, Philip. I just want to share also one of the things that in our center is that the founder of our center is the former Minister of Energy. He also, he brags all the time that he increased the price of the gasoline 8 times, but meaning that he wants the subsidies to be the direct subsidies, because he was educated in America, and he saw that the direct subsidies can have like social welfare and so on, social security and so on. So how to do that in Indonesia is quite difficult as well, because we are dealing with the a large amount of subsidies right now for the gasoline as well. So by doing that, the state budget, we are concerned about the state budget, because for example, like in this situation as well, the condition right now, we are concerned about larger subsidies because of the increase of oil price, right? So meaning that we prioritize on making, we can't think about how to make these direct subsidies, but price subsidies. But in our center, we support actually IISD as well to have direct subsidies, because it can benefit to the people in Indonesia. But how to do that, it depends on the management, and also the situation as well. So I don't have any straight answers for that right now, Philip, because we're like the country needs to have a good management as well to have the good direct subsidies.
Okay, no, thank you. Just good to get a little bit more perspective on sort of what you're thinking about there. Paul, I think I'll go to you with next question, and unless anybody else wants to come in on this topic in particular. No. So I guess, Paul, I know you've got a transportation background, and one of the issues we haven't really talked about today is electrification of transport. I'm interested in your perspective there, and I know it's sort of not the main topic, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but what sort of role you think electrification of transport might play, or some of the opportunities or challenges that might be inherent in that challenge, which is certainly a big one, and one that's getting a lot of global attention.
Well, that's a great question. In the long run, most transport will be electrified. Most land transport, if we're thinking about vehicles, cars, there could be the potential for some use of hydrogen for some heavier types of transport, trains or very, very heavy big trucks. But if we're thinking about cars and scooters, well, it's likely to all be electrified, but it will take time. Indonesia has some targets here in terms of moving towards the electrification of road transport. And it's quite important to get moving. This is another area where once the policy settings are right, and once the market has grown a little bit, it can grow very quickly. Australia has been a bit slow in adoption of EVs as well. But at the moment, with petrol prices very high and EVs becoming more cost competitive and better, at the moment there is a bit of a transition happening here, and we're likely to be seeing this around the world, and including in Indonesia. What can we learn from places like China that are leading the world? China has used subsidies for electric vehicle adoption. They've spent quite a bit of money on that, but that is a more productive way of using money than fossil fuel subsidies. They also have focused on things such as the infrastructure for charging, and they are using some policy mechanisms such as a baseline and credit scheme for producers of vehicles, essentially a scheme to incentivize firms, car manufacturers to be producing EVs. And the production side of the story is important as well. Really for Indonesia, I think this should be a big priority, is EVs and also electric scooters and the overall electrification of the transport sector wherever possible, and also some other sectors as well. Cooking was mentioned, but also we can think about many industrial uses of energy. Those ones might take some time for some of them, but for some others, there are some big opportunities to be electrifying over the next few years.
Thanks, Paul. Maybe I'll just open that up if any of the other panelists are interested in commenting on the potential role for electrification of transport. Feel free to jump in.
Yes, Philip, maybe just add some comments after Professor Paul. The challenge with the EVs in Indonesia is actually the supporting infrastructures, for example, like charging stations, battery production and recycling units. But incentives should also be given to these battery industries. The same thing also applied to the raw materials like nickel, cobalt, aluminum, and so on that produce, supporting the electric vehicles in Indonesia. It is also necessary that Indonesia still relies on traditional automobile investors such as Japan, Thailand, and South Korea, whereas the demand of electric vehicle increases. So in order to speed up the process of converting into electric vehicles, again, it's all about incentives. The government should provide incentives on new investors for the electric vehicles, and also provide maybe provincial policies for electric vehicles, and so on. So I think this is really good opportunities for Indonesia, because Indonesia has large raw materials of nickels in the Sulawesi area. So just add the comments from me.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Andy, over to you. Interested in any thoughts you might have on electrification of transport or on this issue of strategic minerals that where Indonesia might have an advantage for electrification of transport.
Okay, Philips. We have a collaboration among the state-owned enterprises, which Antam, PLN, and Pertamina to develop battery industry. As you may know that the cost of a battery is about 40 to 50% of the cars, of the EVs, so that if we can make it cheaper by using our own material, I think we can push down the cost of the EV. Right now, the cheaper one, I think, costs about around 700 million rupiahs. So it's quite a lot to add, I think, most of Indonesian people. Thank you, Philips.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're getting, I think, down to the end, so I think I might close it there. We don't have any open comments, but Thomas, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on this point before I go to Lourdes for sort of closing remarks.
No, I would say electrification of transport is a big energy efficiency measure. It makes the whole energy value chain much more efficient. Of course, you need to produce some more power, but when combining with renewable energy, you get the produced energy almost from solar or wind almost directly to the wheels of the vehicles, basically. And that is also a saving, both energy-wise, but also in order to avoiding putting subsidy money after buying petrol that you might need to import some of it in an international perspective. So in all our scenarios, massive electrification of transportation is also important. And that's not only road transport. Actually, I think when we're looking a little forward, also shipping between islands in Indonesia to some extent would be relevant for electrification. We see that other places in the world, Indonesian conditions are a little more challenging, some strong currents somewhere. So it's maybe not next year or the year after, but when we are talking a 10-year perspective, I think also it's not only road transport that we are seeing electrification in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining today, Andy and Filda and Paula, Thomas. We really appreciate your interventions and you're joining us today as we're sort of talking about these critical energy transportation issues. I think we've had a good discussion about a number of topics, including electrification and subsidy reform and taxation and the issue of how to ensure that transition is equitable for everyone. But maybe Lourdes, I'll turn it over to you if you're with your sort of final thoughts on sort of what we've discussed today, as well as the report in general. But just as I do that, thank you also to our participants who are attending. I saw some comments in the chat about sharing the resources from the session. We'll certainly look to do that. And feel free to follow up with us if you have any further questions after the event by email, and we'll be happy to answer anything that maybe didn't get addressed today. So with a final thank you, I think I'll turn it over, Lourdes, to you to give the closing remarks for the session.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you very much also to all the panelists. It's been a very, very interesting discussion and conversation. So thank you again. And I'm going to be very, very, very brief. So as Phil says, I mean, we have covered a lot of topics. So I think overall, we have seen how important it is to consider the energy transition in Indonesia for multiple reasons. Decrease the importance of decreasing the dependence and the reliance on fossil fuels, but also about a huge amount of opportunities that the country has in terms of renewable energy, electrification, energy efficiency, and that that can bring jobs, economic development, and of course, support also all the targets that Indonesia has in terms of climate, renewable energy, etc. Indonesia released their RUPTL not that long ago, the latest, and there we see a clear commitment as well towards increasing the share of renewable energy, as well as decreasing the share of coal, or at least the total amount of electricity generated via coal. So this is a great opportunity, and again, the solutions are there. Just need clear policy guidance in order to make them possible. And again, well, our report will be launched today. I think our colleagues will follow up with the participants, sharing the presentations as well as the link to the report. We have prepared also some media package to accompany that. So stay tuned. And again, we're open to questions. So looking forward to continue the discussion. Thank you very much to everyone for joining today.
Yeah, one very last thank you to our two interpreters with us today. Thank you very much for your efforts. I know at times we spoke a little fast, so very much appreciate the diligent effort of the interpreters. With that, I will close the session, say thank you very much, and we'll keep you in touch with our next event. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you all.